Getting to our text today, the gospel according to Ruth and Esther. Now, we've been blessed by the story of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz over the last 4 weeks. Thanks. And that story was set around 1100 BCE, before Israel's period of the kings, before the Jews became an incredibly powerful nation. But our series continues with another story from much later in Israel's history. Esther is set around 400 BCE. This is after Israel has fallen to several ancient Near Eastern powers and now is stuck in captivity in Persia. The book of Esther opens with a portrait of a foolish and hedonistic king of Persia. Ahasuerus is what he's called. Some people think he's Xerxes the first, some think Xerxes the second, some think it's none of those or all of the above. Either way, he's given this Hebrew name for us to help keep track of him in the story. And this foolish hedonistic king throws a party that lasts for 6 months. And when his queen, Vashti, refuses to parade herself before his drunken guests, and I mean, good for you, queen, this foolish and impulsive king is persuaded by his officials to banish his queen and do an empire-wide search for a new queen. Esther, a beautiful Jewish orphan who was raised by her cousin Mordecai, is chosen. But Mordecai advises Esther, do not reveal your Jewish identity until it's absolutely necessary. Enter Haman into the story, who is the real villain. He's appointed the king's right-hand man, and Haman is salty because Mordecai refuses to bow down to him and to the king, and so he becomes determined to annihilate all of the Jews. And he persuades the king, paying a bribe to the empire, to sign a decree to eliminate the Jews. And the decree is sent out through the whole Persian Empire, designating a particular day, the 13th day of Adar, to, quote, destroy, to kill, to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, and to plunder their goods. And this is essentially where our reading picks up for today. It's a compelling story, and we find ourselves with God's chosen people again needing rescuing. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the order came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, and assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict of their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all of the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back to her this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house that you alone of the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your family, your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions, the word of the Lord. So upon hearing of the decree that came from Haman and which was signed by the king, Mordecai and Esther mourn for Israel. The only thing that they think that they can do to help their rather dire situation is to have Esther go before King Ahasuerus and beg for the life of Israel. Esther notes she's afraid to go before the king because, of course, there's a law that if you go before the king in the inner court without an invite, you should be put to death. Mordecai, her cousin, and her father figure reminds her that she too is a Jew, and she would not be spared from this decree to kill all of the Jews in Persia just because she's in the king's house. He tells her if she refuses to go to the king, deliverance for all of the Jews will arise from another place. We mentioned the sparse references to God in the book of Ruth when we were reading it. Well, in Esther, God is not mentioned at all. Like, the name doesn't show up in the book, not even the lowercase one, which is interesting. We're left to infer the work of God based on interpretation. The Jewish rabbis think that this phrase, will rise from another place, is a reference to God, and the only one that we see in the book. That Mordecai is confident that the God of Israel will save and deliver the Jews from the Persians, regardless of whether or not Esther chooses to act. For Mordecai, this issue isn't whether or not God will do what God has always done in protecting Israel. It's an issue of whether or not Esther or her family will be saved with Israel when God acts. Mordecai says perhaps the most famous line in the book of Esther. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? You may have heard this verse quoted in or out of context before. I find that this story creates a lot of tension within me. It mounts up those age-old questions about God's action or God's inaction. If God is going to deliver Israel, just as Mordecai has said, then why would God wait for casualties before doing so? Did God put Israel in a position like this? Did God place Esther as queen for this moment? The action and seeming inaction of God is frankly a puzzle beyond my ability to solve. You could try to explain it if you'd like. I've read a lot of books that do, but we're not really sure. Mordecai believes that Esther has come to this royal position for this moment. The question is not whether or not God will act. The question is, will she? The question for us is not whether or not God will participate in our lives. It's about will we participate with God who is already present. I find this story about the action of God closer to my experience of God in my life. Some of the other stories in Scripture can be hard to relate to. Most of us haven't chatted with God in a burning bush. Nor have we encountered God in a talking donkey, or have we watched an axe float up from the bottom of the lake or physically wrestled with God through the night, only to be left with a wounded hip. But with eyes of faith, I have encountered the work of God in many small ways, albeit subtle, but great ways. I've witnessed healing and resurrection stories. I've witnessed mercy and grace in times of great tragedy. The mercy and the grace of God seems to prop up, hold up life itself, holding back the brokenness of the world as a dam holding back water from a river, pushing back against it when it bears in, even when the floodwaters rise. I can't explain this really, except to point you to the stories where this happens. Stories in many of the lives of you who are in the room where in hard times God was close, or when terror and pain were at your doorstep, God offered you peace and grace. And maybe some of you are there today. Maybe some of you are here to testify that that is where you have been and God has led you out. But that is why we're here for one another. I'm not sure how God acts or when God acts in our world, but God, our Redeemer, always seems to find a way to save us. Here, a Jewish girl just so happens to be a queen in an empire that strictly marries royal Persian people at just exactly the time when that empire would seek to eliminate all of those who follow Yahweh. It might be a coincidence. It might not. After Mordecai's compelling comments to Esther, she tells him to go and gather every Jew who knows how to fast and pray in Susa. She says, when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Esther has been given incredible privilege. She's gone from orphan and foreigner raised by her uncle to queen of one of the most powerful empires in the world. It is at this point in our story, though, that she realizes that her place of privilege has only been given to her so that she can carry out the responsibilities that God is now giving her. Her position of comfort and power gives her the option to run and hide, or perhaps plead for her own safety to the king, or otherwise use her privilege and her power, not for self-preservation, but for the preservation of God's people. And what does she choose? She chooses to use her power for the preservation of others. If I perish, I perish. Whatever befall me may befall me. But I will follow God. Early in the service, we read Jesus calling his followers to discipleship in Luke 9. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. I think Esther is a call to discipleship. Mordecai is calling Esther, much like Jesus calls his disciple, to be willing to give up her life in order to find it. What is the place of power and privilege for, after all, if it's not for lifting up others? This is the gospel found in the book of Esther. That to follow Jesus means to give up our seats of privilege so that others may be lifted up. To be willing to offer up our lives in service of the kingdom that is about the prosperity of not just the elect or elite few, but the prosperity of all people. I think this is the type of kingdom that God is building in our world that we see glimpses of as we gather here this morning. But this kingdom counts on all of us to be willing to follow and give up something in order to do that. Not just sit in our places of comfort, but it costs us something to follow Christ, doesn't it? But I think that is exactly the value of the gospel, because in our giving up, Christ is saving us just as God is saving Israel in this story. Now, the worship team is going to come back up, and we're going to sing another song. The prayer team is in the back and will be available if you want prayer. And also at this time, parents, if you can go get your kids so they can participate in our graduation Sunday, that'd be good. But I'll leave you with this. We're going to learn from Esther again this week and hear the rest of that story. But as we encounter Esther, may we learn to see God at work in the small and big places of our lives. May we be compelled by God to consider giving up our places of power to lift up those without it. And may we be called into discipleship with Christ, giving up our lives to Jesus in order that we might find our lives in him. Amen.